Hi, I'm Shlomi Ron. I'm the CEO of the Visual Storytelling Institute based here in sunny Miami, Florida. And we are a think tank based on the principles of the power of visuals and the really amazing attraction of stories that we all enjoy. We provide visual storytelling services for brands that want to rise above the communication noise in the areas of consulting, training, and thought leadership. And if you'd like to learn more, check out visualstoryteller.com. The topic for today is something I'm really excited about. We're going to talk about how to create cinematic brand videos. And the reason I picked this topic is because if you rewind back to a few years ago, it's all started with branded entertainment. If you think about product placement, I actually, worked for a while in a product placement agency. I would receive scripts where highlighted areas where with different product categories, I need to find sponsors. Nowadays, a lot of brands are moving to branded content where the product is not an afterthought, but it's actually part of the storyline. And you start your whole storytelling creation with the brand in mind. So it's not a separate entity. So to help me unpack this exciting topic, I'm super excited to have Steve Pearson. He's the head of visual storytelling and branded content at US Today Network. So welcome to the show, Steve.
Hey, thank you.
Awesome. Great. So before we jump right in, I'd like to kind of step back and maybe you can tell us your journey, your backstory, if you can recall what was that magic moment that made you want to get into visual storytelling?
Yeah, it's really just a collection of saying yes to things and taking opportunities that have always kind of laddered to, the next thing, right? Like I started off, I was fortunate enough to turn an internship at a PR firm into a job, and then did that for a little bit, moved into the agency world, did a lot of like design and creative, specifically around the kind of social boom of having to create content that kind of looked like user content, but also like had the polish of a brand. And then kind of just kept parlaying those types of moves into the careers that I wanted to kind of like move towards, which video, like film, video, commercial, all of that. That's always been kind of where I wanted to be, but didn't necessarily go the route of like film school or something like that. But it's, it's funny because every job that I've taken from school to this point, and I've has been kind of prepared me for that next role, right? Like being a film student, like from a approach and kind of like the visuals and the story, there's a lot to be said about that. But within this role specifically that I have with GANNETT and the Get Creative Brand Content Studio, now full service agency, it's one of those things that like I'm bringing that knowledge of PR and agency work and into this role that's allowing me to also flex that creativity and the ability to bring these kind of stories to life.
I see. And out of curiosity, I don't know, you mentioned this, your education was in graphic design or film or completely different area?
Yeah, no, I went to school for public relations.
But
this is like kind of like offshoot of this. Like I was in a band all the way through like high school, college, all that stuff. And I was the one that did all of our like website designs and the MySpace. So I learned how to code because of MySpace and things like that. So like just kind of been a jack of all trades. And like I said, just saying yes to things and taking those opportunities. And that's been what's really just kind of like everything has been like everything I've done previously has, I still kind of use today in a way.
I see. Wow, this is a fascinating story because I think you have a great lesson here for other folks that are listening or watching is that sometimes, you just need to try new things and really experiment. The road to, what you're going to end up doing is not necessarily needs to be go through the highway of a film school or becoming a graphic designer. I mean, today with the availability of amazing tools of no code platforms, you can do amazing stuff.
Oh yeah, and I mean, you know, not to discredit any schooling or anything.
Yeah,
I know
of course.
you're on the same page as that too, but yeah, like,
yeah.
But it for me, it's kind of like, you know, a lot of the resources and things that I've used have been through like a non-traditional kind of either shadowing somebody, or, you know, just kind of being a fly on the wall, or things like YouTube, or, you know, the internet is just like an amazing resource for like, oh, I don't know how to do this like one thing on After Effects. Like, how can I? There's like 60 people that have done a tutorial video to show you how to do it. You know, and it's always at like a range of like polish or skill, but you can kind of like at least get the fundamentals of that.
Yeah, the gist of it. Yeah, of course.
And then move on. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I love this story. That's great. So now you are the head of visual storytelling at GANNETT and at Get Creative, which is an agency within the USA Today network. Same, you know, another example is a T Brand Studio at the New York Times, right? So it's another equivalent.
Yeah, yeah, very similar. Our and our roots kind of have always started as a branded content studio, and that's basically brands come to us looking for, you know, a way to get their brand on the USA Today network, whether that's usatoday.com or like one of our 200 plus publications that we have, like, ranging from Austin Statesman's Journal, Detroit Free Press. You know, there's a lot.
No, but, of course, yeah.
Yeah. So because like there's with especially with, you know, public media publication, there's the editorial product, which you can do a sponsored by kind of thing, and then there's the branded content. So the editorial, like, that's a brand is just supporting an editorial initiative. There really isn't a lot of like, you know, they're not necessarily controlling what the editorial team is saying.
The church and state boundaries are really
and then there's branded content, which is like, hey, we'll do this. Like, let's figure it out. We're happy to work with you and try to bring a story to life. So we do that through articles, infographics, listicles, interactives, and then of course video. And then we even have started to do like audio to support some of our, you know, podcasts that the editorial team has created.
That's brilliant.
But mostly my like kind of vertical is within the like photo video world of this.
Any thoughts now with the, you know, Salesforce Plus upcoming streaming service for USA Today?
Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. You know, I mean, and that's kind of the funny thing about all this, right? Like, the landscape is constantly shifting. So you can't get too cozy doing one of anything, right? Like, you know, like, and it's even like how some of the social, like, we obviously help like use social to help amplify some of our videos and do that. And we used to cut videos, like very abbreviated videos for social cuts, and then like Facebook, Instagram, and all that have now raised their, like, you know, an Instagram reel or story or IGTV had a very strict, like, it can't go over this time limit, and now you can post a 2-hour video on Instagram. Not sure anybody really want to watch a 2-hour video, but you can do it. And like, and a lot of the social, you know, like they went from promoting short form to now they push up, you know, a little longer form. So you're kind of always shifting, and what you were doing previously doesn't always mean that's like the same thing,
of course,
which I always appreciate, because like that's not my style.
It also makes it more interesting as you kind of diversify your products. So as head of visual storytelling, you know, this is a question I'm asking all my guests. How would you define visual storytelling?
Yeah, I mean, I think visual storytelling is literally just, I mean, breaking it up into two, right? Like, storytelling is at its root just telling stories, and I think, like, at least for us, how I would kind of represent that is in most cases for brands, and doing it in a way that hopefully doesn't feel like a crazy, like a commercial or
Right, exactly.
something it feels like, oh, I'm getting value out of this. I'm learning something maybe, whether that's about a product or about someone's story or just kind of an initiative, or like a theme that maybe a brand is tied to or wants to kind of.
And a quick question, just sub question regarding the storytelling part. Do you kind of go in with the mindset of exploring different story structures, or you
Yeah.
just okay?
Oh yeah, no. It's specifically for us at GANNETT, right? Like, um, we've done kind of more commercial approaches to things, narratives, stuff like that.
Yeah.
I would say that maybe 80% is kind of in a profile driven story. Like, so it's coming through a real person, which is because it's a great way to communicate, make people, empathy, things like that. The other thing is it's kind of native to how USA Today would tell a story, right? Like we don't want it to be just like a complete bait and switch of like, oh, you're coming to the story. And this feels nothing like editorial content whatsoever. I mean, we kind of you got to be careful, right? Like we don't want it to feel like totally edit, but we want it to have that kind of approach so that it doesn't feel like a complete departure for something that if I'm coming to usatoday.com, that it would be different than what I would
following the brand book.
And even just the ad experience, right? Like as you're flowing through, like you're clicking through a story, you're reading a story, and then you go to the next page and then you go through a story. So it's a kind of similar concept. We don't want it to feel too far from that, right? Like, but then, the beauty of it too is there is a brand behind it and there's things like that. So there is a level of polish and a level of kind of craft that goes into these stories, so that not only is it something that the brand feels proud of at the end of the day, that we feel proud of, and then also it's cleanly telling the story.
No, that makes sense. And of course, then there is the visual side of it, makes it much more memorable.
Right. And that's the visual part of this visual storytelling. Is just like is the thing that kind of allows that visual recall. And so you're not only like hearing it, you're seeing it, you're pulling it away because you have that recognition. And sometimes that includes the products. I'm going to share a couple examples, but one is very product driven, and then one that's more based around an initiative.
Got it. All right. So now that we understand your point of view about visual storytelling, let's kind of zero in on the topic of today. So when you go and create this cinematic brand video, first of all, how do you define it? Do you have a sense of this is cinematic versus this is not? Are there any various types?
Yeah, I think at the pure form, cinematic is really kind of approaching a project with the idea of thoughtfulness, with the resources, with not just, hey, let's point the camera at that thing and then roll on it and then move on. It's setting up lights. It's setting up, building a scene, building a mood, building a look, right? That like when you look at the video, it doesn't just jump around. It's very even. It has and the way that the lighting is positioned kind of gives you, and the way the framing and all of those things that you kind of notice when you watch a commercial or a movie or something along those lines. It has a lot of those similar characteristics. And you see that a lot now. I think content in general, when you're even watching, the documentaries of today opposed to the documentaries of 20 years ago is a huge difference. There's so much, the way that they film interviews and B-roll and things like that. Even on kind of I would say not the best documentaries, a lot of times they still look really good. And that's sometimes also, and to hide some maybe some plot holes or things like that. I was it looked really good, right? And it has that visual appeal that maybe hooks somebody in. to just be like, oh, that's a pretty thing to look at, right? We're
Got
making
it.
an interview look good, right? That's kind of the how we often try to like pose this, opportunity and challenge is like
I
we're coming
see.
into someone's space and we're like, how do we make this look good?
Right, right, right. So
And
you touched on two areas. One is really the production value, that it feels like a real film, like even something you would watch on Netflix. But do you see any different types? You mentioned documentary. Are there any other maybe action story or other types that you do normally?
yeah, I mean, I would, like I said, I think our approach is often in that kind of documentary, like
Yeah,
we call it like branded cinematic doc film.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
it changes names, but
Right.
it's kind of just try to convey like how we approach these.
I see.
And a lot of that is kind of you know, uh talent, the person who is who we're focusing on kind of
Hmm.
talking about it, and then we
Right.
cover that scene, that interview with B-roll and things like that. But yeah, we've done narrative work. We've done things. We did a fun piece like right before Thanksgiving. I think it was like in 2019
Hmm.
for one of those like robot vacs, and it was
Yeah.
like it was this whole kind of structure around a family divvying up chores,
Hmm.
and it's just kind of like a
Yeah,
humor approach to the common. We're getting
I
ready
see.
for people to come over for Thanksgiving.
Right.
Got to clean.
Yeah.
Um, the son always gets stuck vacuuming, and his mom does him a solid and buys this like robot vac and to
Got
kind of
it.
help him out, because
Oh,
it's a whole
that's
thing, but it kind of had this like office, like there
yeah.
was the testimonial
I
talking
see.
head, and then also just kind of the fly on the wall
Storyline.
camera with
Yeah.
snap zooms,
I
like
see.
that type of stuff.
Yeah.
It was
Oh, that's
fun.
cool. Yeah. So when you work with your clients, walk us through. What is the process looks like? Is it something that Duracell comes to you with a creative brief? We want to have this business goal, drive awareness or drive loyalty, whatever. Maybe how the process starts and
Yeah. So that's kind of the beauty of the studio, like brand, or get creative, right? Because each product that we offer
yeah,
kind of answers a different KPI that a
yeah,
brand might be looking for, right? Video is often in the like funnel of like awareness,
yeah,
right? Not always the best driver for uh,
transaction or sales.
transactions, things like that.
Yeah,
But definitely in that that awareness part of the funnel.
yeah,
But like things like listicles and articles that have hyperlinks and things like that, like those are great drivers for that type of like
right.
to get somebody to a site to transact, right?
Because it's further down in the buyer's journey. They're looking for more details about benefits, features.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we have different things to answer. So a brand comes to us with a challenge, whether in maybe a loose creative brief or a really
Mm-hmm.
tight one. It's not, kind of just
Yeah.
depends. And then we respond to that with a total program, and that's going to include things like I was listing up before: articles, listicles, infographics, hubs, videos, things like that. That
I
then we
see.
put together, and it's a full program. And now sometimes like a brand will come, they just want a video or they just want articles, and we certainly do that. But and I think like you kind of already queued up Duracell on how that was kind of this like whole program that we put together that had a hub, it had
So
video,
it's a full
article,
campaign basically, as opposed to one project.
yeah.
Got it.
And I guess like this is kind of a good way to kind of move into that, but it turns like what they came at us with was about they were looking to obviously promote batteries and storm preparation for hurricane season, and this all happened last year.
I see.
And so we put a program together. We worked with an agency that kind of had like a loose idea, or not, I wouldn't say loose. It was like pretty fleshed out idea that then we kind of plussed up within our world of USA Today. And and through that, we just put a program together on storm preparation, and we had these what we called storm saga stories, which were we found people in kind of the Gulf region that had gone through storms and kind of each had a different take. Like we had a charter boat captain who has, you know, she's out on the water all the time in the Gulf, has lived in the Gulf her whole life and experienced a storm as a child, Hurricane Opal, and kind of what that lasting impact was. There was a woman in Port St. Joe in Florida who had just bought a house, moved there, and then 2 days after like putting an offer on the house, had to evacuate because of Hurricane Michael, and it completely destroyed the house.
I see. Interesting.
And then we had, and then we had a fella in Galveston, Texas, who was a animal husbandry, which I think is kind of more like he oversees the animals in this like park. And it's like aquariums, and they have like kind of rainforest exhibits and things like that. In Galveston, Texas, and they were hit by Hurricane Ike, and he was kind of explaining how they went through that whole thing. And these are all
really personal stories that really bring up bigger points.
And those, and that's what makes, you know, I think like that's kind of the challenge with USA Today, or like with this world with a public, you know, media publication and trying to create content, is we don't want to just make stuff up, right? Like, we don't want to like artificially create Greg's story in Galveston. It's really about, you know, saying, hey, we're going to find stories like this to the brand. The brand goes, cool. And then we got to do it, right? So we do all sorts of different ways of outreach and to find different stories. And a lot of it is, we're very fortunate within the USA Today network, because like I was kind of saying before, we have over 200 other publications. And you
can draw from a lot of sources.
So we have, so we have, even if we're not like necessarily using editorial teams and things like that for this, the newsrooms, like they're so ingrained in those communities, they know people. So we're very fortunate to have that resource to try to source these kind of you know, very unique stories to tell sometimes. I mean, a hurricane story is kind of like, if you live in the South, like especially the Southeast, you've probably been through one at some point, but whether or not you have kind of a exciting story to tell is a whole different story, right? Like a good story wouldn't be, you know, the hurricane came through, nothing happened, and
no conflict. Like, there's no story.
It's about finding like, oh man, that's a really crazy, you know, situation to kind of walk into. So
no, that's good. This is really interesting. I was kind of listening to what you just said, and you know, it's so obvious, you know, unlike a pure brand, you know, like take the Duracell, you know, if they're trying to do visual storytelling, for example, so they need to really come up with great stories. But since you are sitting in a media company that is based on actual journalists that's constantly crunching stories, it's much easier for you to find those stories, as you said, you know, especially because of the network of local publications. I'm kind of wondering, outside the story side, your team is comprised of filmmakers, photographers. Do you find yourself relying on in-house, or you sometimes outsource for specialty needs?
Yeah, so our video team specifically is a very small core group of producers and editors. That's kind of our main kind of goal. And then what we do is we have crew members that we will call on, or if we're in a specific area, because it's one of those things, like in most cases, I would say 60%, 70% of our jobs, we're going to them. We're, you know, they're not coming to New York and we're filming on a stage or something like that. Like we're going to Florida and Texas, or, you know, India or Austria or Montana, you know, like we're going to those places to tell those stories.
On location,
capture them. So sometimes, you know, depending, and it's all budget dependent, right? Of who we can bring, who we hire local. We often try to hire local crew members just out of like, where you can do, there's some great things that come of that, right? Like they know you know, how that area operates. They know where to go.
They know how to execute. Yeah.
They also know where all the good food places are.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
It's
Instead of us
important.
being like, oh, where do we go eat tonight? You know? And so, and it's also just kind of the camaraderie that you build too.
Right.
You
I
go to
see.
and it's, you never know when you're going to have to come back to some of these places. And so it's fun to have those, to build those relationships and work with other talent. And as you know, I often kind of play as like the director on a lot of these. And it's also, it's a challenge for me because I'm not in a situation where I'm always working with the same DP or the same and sometimes like I'll DP myself depending on, like we said, budget dependent. But most of the time, yeah, like that's kind of the fun challenges. You can't, like, it's not like jazz, right? Where it's like we play with the same guys and they know where I'm gonna go and what I want all the time. So you have to really work on your communication skills. Be like, okay, like we've never worked together, so we got to talk before, we got to talk on the day, and we got to talk after, like, and build that relationship so that it's a fun process for everybody involved, but also we're getting the job done.
Got it. And still on the process, because it's really fascinating, is the creative process includes also the local team that you work with, or it's kind of a watered down, this is what the story should be, and here you go off to the races, or you bring them from from day one to kind of brainstorm and help you with the story?
It depends. I would say it's probably most of the time we have that fleshed out before we bring on local crew members or things like that. Maybe if I'm hiring a local DP, I might have those we might bring them in for those conversations earlier. But for the most part, it's usually pretty figured out before before someone is hired.
I see.
That's how it works for us. I mean, as far as like these kind of quicker form, kind of videos and things like that. But yeah.
And it's naturally after the client already blessed it and said, yeah, that's the direction we want to go.
Yeah, and that's really the biggest challenge often is getting client buy-in and getting them to feel comfortable about this, right? Because you have to also remember too, it's like they're investing a lot of money into this product, and they want to see success and ensure that we're telling the right stories. So there's so much work that goes into this, like building treatments, sometimes scripting, storyboarding. The whole profile kind of stories are a little trickier to storyboard because oftentimes like we're going in kind of blind to like what the environment is. We usually talk to our talent once or twice before we actually arrive, but
I see.
Most of the time we're
coaching them on set
with like, we're gonna shoot stuff that looks like this is kind of the idea, but
I see.
We go into someone's house and you're like, okay,
so it's unscripted in a sense.
We maybe need to move some things around a little bit so that the light is falling in the way we want. And that's kind of what we were talking about earlier about like that craft, right? Like we're not just going in and being like, cameras up, roll camera, roll sound. Like we walk into a space and I'll work with the DP and the gaffer grip and the team, and it will kind of decide like, okay, we might need to like reposition some of the furniture in the house, like so that this window is our key, our light source, and we're gonna use that to either augment or to kind of give that nod to, oh, if we put a light here, or if we put a light here or here, something like that, like, like we see windows here, so it would make sense that light is coming from that.
Yeah, you actually remind me of how Fellini used to tell how he would shoot his films. He would never know exactly how it's going to shape up. He will show up on the set, and as you just described, based on the setting, the conditions, he will just direct the team, because again, you got to improvise based on the condition at present. You can't really script everything.
Well, and and we have like our budgets and things like that. Our budgets are healthy enough to get stuff done, but like I'm not gonna spend the money on a already sun, or something like that
Right, right.
because that requires a generator, requires 2 people, a lift, maybe, so this one light that's like,
yeah,
maybe on paper costs, $2,000 or something like that, is now
right.
turned into a $12,000 thing because you got to hire all these people and have all this infrastructure to make that one light. So our big thing is, where's the sun going? How can we utilize
Lighting,
sun?
yeah.
And sometimes that means early mornings, late nights, but that's how we are able to like often use that to our advantage.
Got it. So now we're all dying to see some examples after we talked a lot about the different ways you produce those cinematic videos. So why don't you share a few examples and maybe share your thoughts?
Sure. Yeah, and this will be a good example of what we just kind of talked about,
Yeah.
time and light, right?
Yeah.
So the first one I'm going to share is from that Duracell campaign that we were just talking about. Let me just pull up my screen. Here we go. Okay, can you see that?
Yep.
Okay.
In order to be a charter captain or work in the industry at all, you absolutely have to be passionate about it. Every day is an adventure. I'm Captain Brandy. I own a charter fishing business in Destin, Florida. I'm a second-generation captain. My dad's been here my entire life.
So as you can see, just like what we were kind of talking about, we're shooting, this was all shot on her boat in like around 6 or 7 o'clock, or I think actually it might have been 8.
Yeah.
But the sun is low, it's backlighting her. And that's what's really like some of these shots, really what kind of give that cinematic approach, right? Like the sun is kind of clipping, you can see along her, her hand. It's soft. It's not this like, nobody has raccoon eyes or it's blasting. There's shape to it, right? And then even in the B-roll, like it's kind of creating this mood of, kind of romanticizing the being a charter fishing captain, but also kind of cool that she's a female charter fishing captain, right? Like that's was kind of a cool thing to pull out of this too, is like, not necessarily when you walk those docks, most of the captains are male. So Brandy was a very cool kind of profile in that way, but also, it's a neat kind of,
Did you also kind of pay attention to the color template of the scenes that you want to kind of cold versus warm colors to
right. So we often, for this story, because it's kind of funny, like often you are, I mean, with a brand story, we never want it to be like doom and gloom, right?
Yeah, exactly.
We're talking about hurricanes and the impact that faces on people. So we don't want it to necessarily feel like this cool, like cold, kind of scary thing. It is a scary thing having to go through a hurricane, but we want it to have like a hopeful outcome. So even though we're kind of approaching the scariness of a hurricane, but we're bringing this warm environment to help kind of bring the story up, in that like, you can do this, like we can get through this, just be prepared.
And bake some optimism into
and what was cool about this is, then we kind of brought in her talking about her experience with Hurricane Opal.
Tell Mother Nature what to do.
Kind of build that, and this is using archive footage.
I see.
My first
a little bit of sound design to help
5 or 6 years old.
Explain
when
what
we
she
were
experienced
leaving for Opal, I didn't really think anything of it. And then
this is important there.
Right. And then
historical shots.
From there, she starts talking about, so to incorporate Duracell into this, and the challenge was storm preparation, right? Is she starts talking about what you kind of need to prepare for storms.
So the primary message for Duracell here was to bring up what message?
The message was for obviously storm preparation, the things that you need. Obviously batteries are a huge part of that. There's a lot of things that when the power goes out, you need your weather radios, you need your flashlights, you need kind of to be able to charge your devices, things like that. And those are all things that Duracell offers, right? So they're it's a great kind of product to be to kind of be included in this journey, right? Of of storm preparation,
Yeah.
it just feels so native. Like it didn't feel forced. Like when
Exactly.
we showed the batteries being
Yeah.
put into the, like it really was
Part of the story. Yep.
Yeah, it's not like, it wasn't, the B-roll is very contextual to the story itself.
Yeah. And that goes back to what I mentioned in the opening. This is not the difference between a product placement versus a branded content where the product is actually integrated into the mechanics, the flow of the story.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you can see like this is, and then how this all lived on USA Today was we had these standalone video pages where this is the same video that we were just watching.
Right.
And then we have like the other products were in the series, like this was the woman who evacuated right after she bought her home. And then this is Greg, who was overseeing the overseeing all of the animals at the Moody Gardens. But what we also did was this stop motion video that was all around kind of the things that you need to pack in a storm prepared kit, right? Like what you should put in. But what was cool about this video, what we did was it has a shoppable functionality to it.
Oh, really? Oh,
so you can go here, yeah, and actually shop for the batteries on, you know, one of these, and it clicks off to.
And what was the response? I'm curious.
What was that?
What was the response for the?
Oh, it was actually, you know, as far as like click-through rates and things like that, like that was, it performed really well. It's, you know, it's a very simple interface to kind of show people what to do. And it's not asking a lot of someone, but then we also included an article too that kind of had, you know, some of those.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool.
Maybe a little bit more
information
for that. But yeah, but you can also see like there was a very like that look and that kind of warmth in the way that we shot it and lensed it and everything like that. And one of the things that I was kind of very proud about, specifically with that campaign, was this was something that we produced during the pandemic.
Right.
And it was a fun project because it was like really a small team. It was just myself, a DP, and at the time my creative director.
Right.
And we were just kind of bouncing around the whole, you know, Gulf Coast with a van full of equipment. And it was fun because it was really like kind of going back to that, the roots of filmmaking and doing, you know, trying to solve problems with a small amount of people and the resources that we had with us, because it was challenging at the time. You know, A, COVID is happening. B, a lot of the rental houses and the film industry was kind of like in a little bit of disarray because it was like, oh, how do we do this? There was a lot of still confusion on how to operate. But at the end of the day, we were, you know, this program had come through. We had talked to our team and our, you know, our leadership about, hey, we think that we can still do this. And it's, you know, hurricane season happens when it happens. So that was kind of the other thing too. Like this was publishing right at the, you know, the height of hurricane season, which I think is why it also performed really well, because it just it looks amazing. And we're going to share a few links to those videos in the show notes for everybody to check out the examples. But since you've done so many cinematic videos by now, I bet, what would you say are the top challenges people need to watch for when they think of creating videos? I think it's the biggest thing is I mean, we're kind of talking about preparation, but like it's honestly, I've heard this phrase just recently. I was listening to another podcast, but if it's broken on paper, it's going to be broken like together. So if you don't have that, like that preparation, and you don't have the story figured out, or you don't have the approach, and you know, like every good plan, the plan B of every good plan is to throw away plan A, right?
Improvise.
And that's what happens. I mean, I have like probably 1,000 stories of where, you know, we had a really good plan and we showed up and something had to change. We had to do something different. And that's kind of you're not in, you know, you don't always have the right tool for the job whenever that happens, but you got to kind of figure out like, okay, how can we do this? What's going to be our solve?
So you got to be more adaptive and flexible.
Yeah, you have to have a plan, but you have to be willing to throw it away and use your learnings and the things that you know, your failures. Hopefully it's, you know, not a big enough failure that I was like, oh crap. But you know, as long as you go and look back at everything that you've done, I think that's also a really important part, is that kind of post-mortem and sitting down with your team and being like, okay, like what did we do really well on this? What did we not? How can we like make sure that we don't run into this again? Is that something that we can plan for, or is there something that maybe we just need to be a little bit more on our toes? Were we communicating well?
Got it.
And because it's like I said before, you know, like when you work with the same people, at least in my core team, it's like easy to kind of get on this like, oh, well, this is how we do things, right?
Yeah.
I think it's just like any relationship, you know, communication is so key, and ensuring that everybody kind of has like that say in the process, but then also allows that time of reflection to be like, what can we do better, and how can we kind of approach this? Because you know, sometimes I mean, we did it the only way we could have, but then other times, you know, maybe there was a different way.
Yeah. And tell me something, you know, after you finish a project, a campaign like this, you have the visual assets, they've been distributed and kind of customized to different platforms, you know, Instagram, maybe you kind of edit shorter or longer. What you report back to the client at the end, how do you measure success? You mentioned earlier a few KPIs, but can you talk about that?
So that's a whole part of the program as well. And even as the program's optimizing, you know, our content strategy team that puts together that, you know, kind of champions a lot of the articles and listicles and headlines. Sometimes like they'll optimize headlines mid-campaign to maybe help drive clicks to those pages a little bit more, and those ad drivers that we create that kind of coincide and drive to these videos and programs. So and just like you mentioned, we'll do like how we have a postmortem internally. We also do a postmortem for the client to show how we measured against those KPIs that they put out and what they wanted to see with these programs to measure the success. And that's kind of the beauty of digital, is you have like digital content is you have so many touch points to show those metrics, right? I mean, I often laugh, like there's definitely a place for outdoor media and things like that, but I don't know how, like the amount of like ways that we can show that this ad
exposure, the reach,
or this content worked or didn't work, is huge. Where like outdoor, I mean, it's kind of like, oh, I mean, how did that drive? Was that the thing that influenced somebody? Maybe, you know, you really just look at
attribution is hard to kind of reference sometimes.
Yeah. So you can really zero into how the program, and even, you know, like like when clients provide kind of their own click-through links to, you know, the tracking links and things like that. I mean, you can really see a lot of detail.
Right. But for the most part, the project that you work for clients are considered classic owned media, because you're using your own channel, right? You don't buy paid ads somewhere else. That would happen maybe on the client side later on with the access to the assets. But on your part, when you deliver a project or distribute a project, it's typically on your own media channels of USA Today, right?
Yeah, and that's the beauty of you know, branded content working, you know, like a branded content studio like a Creative or like any of the other media publication, is not only are you getting a production of these assets, they're also running on our site. Like we're giving you creation, you know, and distribution, right? So it's not just one or the other, right?
Exactly.
So that's really the value in branded content.
Absolutely.
And, whether, like I said, it's with USA Today or anybody else, it's just you have that two kind of tiers of an asset or something that a brand really wants, right? Like
Right.
to create an asset, you know, you got to
Exactly.
do commercial, AAA director, talent, all this stuff. It costs a lot of money, and then you got to find somewhere to put that ad, right? So it's a cool kind of ecosystem that it all lives.
It has a
in.
longer shelf life on the client side because they can use those assets later on and just kind of recycle them.
Forever, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, in this Duracell campaign in particular, like that we were talking about, like they could easily just
it's evergreen pretty much.
They wanted to. I mean, it's pretty evergreen, whether you're talking about.
It's true.
And you know, hurricane season happens every year, just like
exactly.
so I mean, it's programs like that, you know, that have that kind of evergreen. It doesn't have like a short shelf life. I mean, those are the ones that really, I feel, succeed in this space because it's you know, you never know when someone's going to come across it, right? Like,
sure.
You don't get to necessarily control that part of it.
And tell me, you know, this is a question I started asking my guests lately, you know, obviously with the pandemic, how's the pandemic has changed your dynamics? Do you find that you produce content that it's more virtually with virtual teams, or talk to me about the pandemic effects?
Yeah, no, I mean, certainly, like when the pandemic happened, it was like, oh man, how are we going to do this?
Yeah.
Like, there was some, like, I remember in April, especially in New York, you're just like, I can't even leave my apartment. How are we supposed to do this, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's just, I often tell people this all the time, like when we talked about the pandemic, and I'm a glass half full guy, like I always will be. And I was saying, like, if COVID-19 had hit in the early 2000s or 2010, like, I mean, this did not exist at this capability. Work from home was not an option like it is now.
So true.
Right. So we would have been in a lot more trouble if it had happened earlier. It would have been better if it didn't happen at all. But I think that in some cases, it's really shown like how we progressed technologically. It's shown how we're able to kind of keep the lights on and continue to work even through a really tough, challenging time. And video chat, internet speeds, things like that have been huge. I mean, even the ability for us to work on a project, like that's been the biggest challenge, not really the production, it's the like editing, right? Because you know, you can get an IBM server, but like that's going to cost you know, to have that kind of technology to be able to edit off of the cloud and like do that. And we're using, in most of our projects, we're using RED footage, which are pretty heavy file sizes. So we've been that has been the biggest challenge, was trying to figure out, okay, like how do we edit projects together? How do we have that kind of review process? How can I jump into a project file? And my editor is, he's a really smart guy and figured out an awesome solve for that we are able to do that. But yeah, I mean, we did some virtual productions. They definitely have a huge limit at least from our capacity, because we can't build the infrastructure like but
it's more authentic. I would say it's kind of reflecting, you know, really the mindset of, you know, where audience is experiencing as well. So I know there was a great crop of films like that in the first wave of the pandemic.
Yeah, I think it's a little more challenging to probably pull those off now. You know, we certainly still do them, but that kind of, I feel
the novelty effect wore off.
Yeah, well, and it's also like, okay, if we are doing a virtual production or something like that, how do we kind of still add that polish to it? Because there's some, you know, like the actual interview process may be kind of at this quality, but like, can we like shoot B-roll? Can we create animations to help go along with this to make it a little more visually interesting, so that it doesn't just feel like a webcam kind of content? And we did one for one of the brands where, to kind of defeat the crummy quality of a Zoom call, we actually shot a laptop like with the blank screen and put the Zoom call into the laptop, so that it kind of addressed the like poor audio and video quality, and it shrunk the video so it's not like super pixelated at like a 1080 output. So like it's fun things like that, like to
Yeah,
try to
it's finding those flaws that are you can turn into a feature of your film or part of the story experience.
yeah
I love it. You know, this is
yeah.
great.
So it's those
Yeah,
kind
so,
of challenges. Yeah.
yeah. So kind of this is exciting. You know, I really enjoyed this conversation. Just to summarize now, what would you say your top 3 tips for anyone, marketers, content creators looking to create this cinematic brand video?
Yeah, I think like we were saying, the biggest one is preparing
Mhm.
and trying to find making sure that you have a good plan going into it, and making
Mhm.
sure that everybody is on the same page. Because you
Right.
never want to show up, especially like when you're like we were talking about, clients are spending a lot of money on these videos. The last thing you want is for a client to be involved and be like, what are we doing? Right?
Yeah.
You want them to be totally bought, or they have that buy-in going into to your shoot day.
Yeah.
So I would say that's huge. That's
Mhm.
definitely number one of the 3.
Right.
The second being be flexible, being
Mhm.
prepared to make changes. And also, just like anything else, I think a lot of people, the thing that's tricky sometimes is the creative aspect of this, right? Like
Mhm.
the brand is, once again, hiring you to do this. It's their content. Like
Yeah.
you need to, like, you want to bring your creativity and your personality into this, but at the end of the day, you're doing it for the brand. And
But it sounds like you're serving 2 hats. One is really following the brand guidelines, but at the same time, you want to follow the editorial voice of USA Today, right? So it's kind of
yeah, so
playing
you're
it
kind
on
of
2
playing,
hats.
you're trying to kind of build those 2 things together, right?
Yeah.
Like you want it to
Mhm.
feel native
Yeah.
to both
Yeah.
parties, not
Exactly.
a complete departure from one.
Yeah.
So it's really trying to kind of understand where that place is and how you're solving a problem for them, and
Got
trying
it.
to make the best product that you can, that everybody will be happy with. And then I would say the third is just, never never stop learning, never
Mhm.
stop researching and figuring
Right.
out, like always, like I find myself just sometimes just surfing Vimeo, or like looking at,
Right.
like trying to be like, how can we continue to evolve our storytelling in the way that we do profile driven
Sure.
stories, right? Like, because I've always kind of said from day one, I never want to be like a rinse and repeat.
Yeah.
I think in some cases
Love
that's
it.
probably
Yeah.
very frustrating for
Mhm.
some of our sellers, because they're like, oh, like we want to do it like the thing that, it's with anything. If it's
Yeah.
not on your reel, if it's not, like, then most of the time you're not going to get hired for that, right? You need to have, but that's kind of also the reason why, like, we always want to continue to push and try to tell stories differently, is because you don't want to get necessarily typecasted into that one thing, right? Like
Exactly. And
there's
sometimes it
so many
depends.
more.
It depends on the client, how is it a conservative versus more kind of a
Oh yeah.
progressive thinking. So
And
you allow
even
yourself more.
yeah, and even from a personal standpoint, if you want to, like, I always say this is like probably the easiest way to do it. If you want to shoot a car ad and you don't have a car ad on your reel, you're
Yeah.
probably not going to get hired to shoot car ads. You got to figure out, like, how can we leverage, an opportunity, whether that's doing a spec ad or something that loosely has maybe a vehicle in it, like shooting
Right.
that part and being like, okay, like this is how we're starting to kind of get into that. So it's really just pushing the creative, pushing your abilities, and then also just working with people that know what they're doing. I mean, that's probably another huge thing, is just making sure that the people that you're hiring and bringing on know more than you, or can
Yeah.
bring a different product, like maybe
Perspective. Yeah.
perspective into it. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Wow. I think we could have talked for hours on this topic. There's so much
Sure.
to unpack. This
I
is
agree.
amazing. Thank you so much, Steve. I had so much fun learning from all the great work you do at USA Today. And, for all of you listening or watching, I'll see you in the next episode of the Visual Storytelling Today podcast. Thank you so much. And if anybody, just before we close, they want to reach out to you, how they can reach out?
Yeah, no, I'm I think my my website, I can probably drop a link to that.
Yeah, we'll put it on the show notes. No worries.
stevepearson.work. And then, I'm on Instagram, Steve Pearson,
on LinkedIn,
Steve Pearson, things like that. But and certainly, our Get Creative is getcreative.usatoday.com if you want to see
Brilliant.
all the other great work that our team produces, even outside of video. It's all there. So
awesome. Great stuff. Thank you so much again, Steve. And I'll see you guys in the next episode. Have a wonderful day and keep those stories coming and inspiring people. Thank you.
Thank you.